I'm back. Welcome back to Full Time with Meg Linehan. I am Tamerra Griffin, joined for the first time in 2025 by my co-host, Meg Linehan. Hi, Meg. Happy New Year. I'm still saying it.
Welcome back. Welcome back.
Thank you. I had a lovely trip to Puerto Rico to ring in the new year, which was fantastic. Not only because I didn't even realize that Bad Bunny was going to be dropping his new album when I was there, and to be in the country just made it all the more special. I've been listening to it nonstop. But what have I missed stateside? Are you snowed in Vermont?
Yeah. I mean, it has basically constantly been snowing, but low levels here in Burlington, so at least we have that. What is very funny is we're going to have a little parade downtown for UVM men's soccer.
I love that.
In a little bit for their little championship win. So I thought it was very funny when I joked, I think they should parade down Church Street. That's exactly what's happening. So I'm very excited about it.
I mean, clearly they listen to the pod.
Yeah, definitely. UVM men's soccer, huge full-time listeners. But yeah, I mean, it's, it's January. I feel like, I'm trying to be good about reading again. And that's my one resolution as a former literature major, is actually trying to read books. I just finished Kate Fagan's book, The 3 Lives of Kate K. Very good. Highly recommend. Very fast read. So yeah, that's me. What was your best food item in Puerto Rico?
Ooh.
I feel like I'm going to shut you down with that question.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I don't know if on further reflection this is going to necessarily be my favorite, but there is something about that first meal upon arrival that just gets you set up. And I was very intentional about my mofongo being that first meal.
Yes.
I had mofongo with chicken and this amazing garlic sauce with fried sweet plantains. And honestly, part of the reason for going to Puerto Rico was because I truly could subsist on beans, rice, fried plantains, and a protein of choice every day for the rest of my life. So I was very happy throughout the trip. But yeah, love me some mofongo.
You did get back in time just for the biggest trade of the off season, I think.
Oh, right, that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is now the second time that I've been on vacation when a massive trade has happened because, I think we were all in holiday mode when the big Gotham trade took place. But this one was this is huge. I'm going to have to keep scrolling because there are so many layers to this Jaedyn Shaw to North Carolina Courage. After I saw that news, I think I just took a quick dip in the ocean to cool off. But Meg, you have to let me introduce the rest of the show because in addition to discussing this massive Jaedyn Shaw trade, we also chat with former Manchester United and San Diego Wave head coach and new head coach of the Canada women's national team, Casey Stoney. But let's get back to Jaedyn. There is a lot to unpack from this trade. The San Diego Wave, in exchange, gets, I'm going to read this to make sure I don't miss anything, $300,000 in allocation money, $150,000 in transfer fees, international spots for both 2025 and 2026, and the Wave could also get an additional $75,000 in allocation money in exchange for $150,000 in transfer fees. So what I appreciate about this, Meg, is that it's massive, obviously because it's Jaedyn Shaw. But this trade also gives us a great opportunity to sort of break down what actually goes down in a trade, what transfer fees and allocation money actually is. So let's sort of start from the very intro levels of this in breaking down this trade.
Yeah, because also allocation money in theory is going away from the NWSL too, right? And so I think looking at this, first reaction for me was okay, Courage kind of got away with one here. This is actually, it feels like a very cheap trade on their part of yes, maybe $450K total and a couple international spots, but that feels like underpaying for Jaedyn Shaw, right? When you think about where she is at 20 years old. The second part is that when you get into, and in the press release, the first sentence of the kind of money part of it read normally. And I was like, okay, 300K, 150K in intra-league transfer funds, the international spots. And then the next sentence was like, okay, but we could get 75,000 in allocation money if the North Carolina Courage agree to basically take back that $150,000 in transfer. And that's where I was like, why are we doing this? Should not be this difficult to understand. And also from a North Carolina Courage point of view, that seems like totally like, I feel like that team 100% wants to give them allocation money instead of transfer funds, because allocation money you can kind of stockpile, whereas transfer funds you can't. From a Wave point of view, I'm still not entirely clear on what the motivation is for taking allocation money beyond the fact that they maybe have a specific use for it coming up. But yeah, this is not necessarily for what should be a straightforward trade. There are layers to it for sure.
Especially considering the fact that Jaedyn Shaw requested this trade specifically to North Carolina, which I also think that we need to discuss, because there are sort of two perspectives through which to interpret this. There is sort of like the American specific sports culture lens, where this feels a bit unprecedented, and we have gotten questions about how we feel about this, especially when this request is coming from such a young player. Yeah. But then if you pan out and look at this from a more cosmopolitan perspective, it's maybe not quite as surprising, right?
Yeah. I mean, what was funny is one of our editors at The Athletic actually was like hopping in Slack being like, what is the reaction to this trade? So Chris, this part is for you, because I think there is, if you're coming at it from a very American sports point of view, you look at a 20-year-old saying like, I would like to go here, you make it happen for me now. But I think we have to look in it in the historical context of the NWSL, where U.S. women's national team players, I think, did have a little more weight to kind of throw around where they wanted to go. But now, and way more importantly, is you have the CBA, which says, player consent is required for all trades. And what I think is interesting is, like, yes, the Wave went on the record and said, like, Jaedyn Shaw wanted this trade and put it in at a very specific time and wanted to go to North Carolina Courage. Which I think is interesting in its own right. But then that all predates this new CBA, where you have to have player consent. But obviously the trade is happening after, and so the team has worked to send her where she wants to go and thus try to maximize what they get back from North Carolina. But when you think about it, this is kind of the whole reason why the NWSL CBA and why the Players Association was really pushing for this freedom of movement on the player side, because this is way more what is in line with Europe in terms of what players are trying to figure out. Like, I want to go to this team, and, whether it's a transfer fee, whether it's a free transfer, whatever it is, like, that system has worked itself out. And so now we are finally starting to see some of this more like European influence in terms of player movement coming over. But I think if you're coming at this from like an NBA or WNBA point of view, even of just like, she can kind of point and go like, hey, I want to go here. I mean, that's kind of the whole thing, where I think what NWSL and players in general have tried to build is players being able to make those decisions for the best of their careers. This is the whole ball game point, really.
Absolutely. And I will always appreciate the challenging position that the NWSL has been in, wanting to be and remain one of the most competitive leagues in the world in a sport that is more dominant outside of this country, like in a widespread sort of way. And what does it mean to really achieve both? And that's one of the interesting things I think about this trade, is that it opens up all these other questions and really gives you sort of like lifts up the hood. We're seeing the NWSL become more international in terms of the players who are coming into the league. But things like this allow us to see how that is actually able to happen. And so there is a lot to unpack, but we haven't even gotten to what this means in terms of the soccer, Meg. Because Jaedyn Shaw is coming in. She is ostensibly going to be joining, perhaps on the pitch at the same time, the likes of Ashley Sanchez, which gives me goosebumps to just think about how nasty that can be.
Yeah, I know, right?
But what do you think this can tell us maybe about what the Courage are building?
Yeah, I mean the Courage have definitely have had one of the more interesting off seasons. I think there is one big question that we still are waiting on the answer for, and that is what is happening with Caroline, right?
Yep.
And so, I mean, maybe Jaedyn Shaw can come in and replace what a player like Caroline can give you, although it's going to have a different look. But like in theory, this could be, the second half of that partnership with Ashley Sanchez. But like I would hope North Carolina Courage are still trying to get Caroline across the line and re-sign her. But I think it is so interesting because Ashley Sanchez is obviously that kind of central, attacking midfielder. Jaedyn Shaw, I think everybody kind of agrees is best as that sort of false nine. And so,
including her.
yeah. So like, yes, you have the flexibility to maybe play her on a wing, but there is this sense of, can you operate Ashley Sanchez and Jaedyn Shaw and like open up space down the middle? I mean, you think about the formation that North Carolina Courage play, that 4-2-3-1, and they have always, I mean, like even historically, you think about the shape of the North Carolina Courage, they will just like gut you right down the middle. And so adding Jaedyn Shaw to that is just like, oh no. Like, it's going to be really interesting to watch, to say the least.
And she clearly has a vision herself to have requested this specific
Yes.
trade to this team. So I'm just thinking about those first few meetings between her and Courage head coach Sean Nahas about what the plan is going to be. But it's really exciting to think about, Caroline aside, honestly, just from like a strictly midfield perspective.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, with Shaw leaving the Wave, we need to talk about what they are going to be doing. They've been making some moves, both at the collegiate and international level.
They have.
But you can't deny that they are in a serious rebuild right now.
I mean, yeah, rebuild. I do think that their young signings are probably better than what people are maybe giving them credit for. I think they have been pretty intentional about going out and acquiring younger, college kids and figuring out, okay, how are we gonna? But I mean, you can't deny like Jaedyn Shaw leaving, Alex Morgan retiring, Abby Dahlkemper traded to BFC, right? Like they have lost a lot of key pieces. I think everybody is still kind of waiting to see what happens with Naomi Girma, if there is some sort of transfer in the works for her. I mean, like she is very much in the rumor mill. Like, jokes aside, I do kind of wish that she would go on Instagram Live the way that Trinity Rodman went on Instagram Live this week to be like, wow, I'm being traded to, like, I'm going to England. News to me, right? I got to keep following this online because let's find out where I'm going. And so I think there is real intrigue around what's happening with Naomi Girma right at the moment. But yeah, there is a sense of, Cammie Ashton coming in as general manager, obviously ownership change, Jill Ellis departure. There is maybe a chance for a very needed hard reset button on what is happening in San Diego. And Jaedyn Shaw, I think, leaving, that is a player that I think any team would want to build around. And so again, optics for San Diego, not great, but I think at the end of the day, they made a trade happen for a player. They probably could have gotten more in terms of like other teams wanting to acquire Jaedyn Shaw. And so I think that is at least one really positive thing that you can take out of the San Diego column, is that they made this happen, and like now they kind of have to, but they still did it.
That's true. This is, I think, going to be one of those trades that will be studied and definitely discussed for years to come, because it could have huge implications both for the possibilities for players and definitely teams. But related to all of this, I think this is a great time to answer a listener question we got recently from Ruth, who wants to know, where does the money from expansion fees go? Does any of that revenue make it back to the players? Great question, Ruth.
Yeah, I wish we had an answer for you.
Yeah.
The short answer is just like there's not really any transparency. I think, everybody kind of assumes that there is a cut that goes to the league itself. There is some sort of division of money that gets sent out to teams to allow them to invest. But like, yes, maybe some of that money goes in the player contracts, but it's not like there is a direct percentage that is guaranteed for players where every contract goes up by 1% or whatever it would be because of an expansion fee coming in. So all of this, I mean, every league in America is not exactly about to be opening the books. So the short answer is just like, I wish we could tell you.
And it would be nice if it went back to the players.
Yeah.
Maybe just to speak things into existence if that's not already happening.
I know, right?
Of course, this is not the only news of the day or the past few days or since we last recorded the show. There is Marta's new contract to discuss. There is former Utah Royals player Carly Nelson's statement and allegations to discuss. There is fresh out the oven news of Mark Parsons being named the next general manager of Angel City FC to discuss. And luckily, Meg has written stories on all three of those topics that you can check out at theathletic.com. It's a new year, a new season, and maybe you didn't know that Full Time has a free weekly women's soccer newsletter, but it's not too late to sign up for the latest stories, analysis, and more sent straight to your inbox. We will make sure to provide a link for that in the show notes. We're going to take a quick break, and when we get back, we're going to chat with Casey Stoney. All right, joining us on Full Time is the brand new head coach of the Canadian women's national team, Casey Stoney. Casey, thank you so much for joining us. And before we jump into questions about soccer, we just want to make sure, given that Southern California has been your new home the past few years, that everyone in your community is doing okay, given the devastation of these LA fires.
Yeah, fortunately we're far enough away, but obviously know certain people that have been affected. So yeah, it's devastating, but fingers crossed we're at a good distance.
It's good to know.
All right, let's jump into some soccer stuff. I know when your name kind of first came up with this appointment, I think everybody was kind of like, all right, Casey, like this makes sense. Like I think, you know, when I go back to that gold medal run for Canada and the kind of grit and defensive effort that they displayed, I was like, well, this is a Casey Stoney joint. That's got her name written all over it. So what are you thinking in terms of the fit for you with Canada soccer with that style of play that they already have?
Yeah, I think it's my job to build on that and enhance it. I think what I was able to show at Manchester United when I went there is that we could score goals. First 2 seasons at Wave, I think we were top 2 goal scorers, and now it's like, how do I bring that to Canada too? Because they've got the resilience, they've got the hard to beat mentality, they're defensively organised, but how can we be more progressive with the ball? How can we create more opportunities? How can we score more goals is a big remit for me. So obviously, if you want to win things, you've got to keep clean sheets. You know, America showed that in the previous tournament, and it's about how you can now score goals in crucial moments and create more opportunities to score goals. So I think we've got a huge amount of talent in the pool of players that we've got and the pool of players that are coming through. So just embedding a style and a philosophy where we can use the ball effectively.
And Casey, as a defensive specialist on both sides of the pitch, as a player and a coach, I'm thinking about your time with the San Diego Wave and the relationship you developed with and the ways that you spoke about Naomi Girma. I'm looking now at Canada, at players like Kadisha Buchanan, at Vanessa Gilles, and I'm wondering how you are sort of anticipating the way that you'll build relationships with Canada's prominent center backs.
Yeah, I think it's, you know, I always believe that your centre backs, your goalkeeper and your six are pivotal in terms of the fundamentals of your team, because what it allows you to do is give freedom to the attackers to be able to go and do their thing. And they can only do that if you're resolute at the back. And, you know, I look at someone like Kadisha, and obviously she's got a long-term injury, but when she's coming back, being able to develop her, for me, Jade Rose is such an exciting prospect moving forward. Like, I'm so excited. She came to Wave and trained with us, so I know her a little bit better, and I'm excited to be able to see what I can improve in her game. But it's also about like how we can use them on the ball too. How do we make sure that they're really comfortable to play the style of play we want to play, to be able to get our attacking players on the ball as early as possible. So yeah, I'm looking forward to both aspects, on and off the ball, of how we can develop the team.
Yeah, that thought about Jade coming to train with the Wave, I think that's a really perfect launching point for some of the bigger questions I think we have about pathways for Canada's talent development. Obviously, you have the NSL starting soon, but you have NWSL, you have players in Europe. So where are you kind of thinking of, you know, where you'd want to see players, what paths you want to start seeing develop? Like, how important is having a pro league in Canada to the success of a national team?
I think what I've shown as a head coach in both teams that I've managed so far is I give young players a chance. You know, Lauren James was playing for me at 16 years old. And if you're good enough, you're old enough, and it's about giving those players that are young enough coming through the system opportunities, especially over the next year. We haven't got really any competitive games to come into the squad, experience what senior environment is like. But also, for me, I've said this before, it's not my job to tell players where to play. All I want them doing is playing at the highest level they possibly can with as much minutes as they possibly can. I experienced the NWSL as a defender. It's probably one of the most testing leagues you're playing, because you have to defend big spaces, 1v1s quite a lot and frequently. So it's good for you. It's also very intense in terms of speed of play. But we've got players that are playing in Europe, across Italy, France, and in the WSL as well as the NWSL. And now with the NWSL coming in, it's such a positive space because it gives another space and platform for players to play. I said it in a previous interview, I'm sick of seeing young players sitting on benches. Now there's enough places for players to go and play. And it gives Canada a top league, professional league, and they're hiring some really good coaches, and it'll only bode well for the national team programme.
Speaking of coaches, we'd love to get your opinion on the current state of coaching pipeline in the women's game. In the NWSL, at least, a lot of the recent head coaching positions have gone to men, which is a continuation of a trend that we have seen for some time now. Do you see that beginning to change? And sort of how are you seeing the pipeline for female head coaches to gain some of these opportunities?
I think it's also part of my responsibility as a coach is to make sure that I'm opening the doors for other female coaches to come into the environment, to learn, to observe, and eventually, hopefully, this job is held by a Canadian female, and not me. So it's a responsibility that I have to try and promote that. I've been in the game a long time. I've seen so many average male coaches come into the game when females don't even get the opportunity. But, research will show you that, a man will go for a job that he's not qualified for and think he should get it. And a female won't even enter the room because she doesn't think she should get it and she's qualified. So it's about creating spaces where females can be comfortable, where we can develop them, where they have an opportunity to grow. And part of my responsibility as a head coach is to make sure that I'm role modelling that and encouraging more female coaches into the game. I think there's some fantastic coaches in the NWSL now, I really do. Would I like to see more female coaches? Absolutely. You lost one at Wave and gained a man, so you lost another female coach. So it's one of those situations where that happens. But we can only make sure that we keep, I think, pushing the agenda for more females in the game at all levels, not just in coaching, at executive level, throughout the game, in all roles, to make sure that it's accessible to everybody. I think it needs to change, but I'm a female, so I'm going to say that.
I mean, do you see that as part of your mission here at Canada Soccer now, of looking at that landscape and kind of going, okay, what are the opportunities? Where can some of these doors be open? I know, I think about going back to some of the first conversations with Emma Hayes coming over. She was just like, listen, I'm going to come in here. I'm going to poke my nose around everywhere. I'm going to figure out what I've got a chance to do and maybe think about this landscape from a more holistic point of view rather than just kind of thinking about, okay, I've got all these pathways coming into the national team and I've got to focus on the national team. Is that something that you want to kind of think about of how do I maybe look at this landscape?
Yeah, my job is so much more than just being a head coach of the senior team. It's about looking at the whole landscape in Canada and just being able to help and support. I've got lots of experience having been part of the bidding process for the WSL in England, having played there for so many years. I've run academies. I've been, I've worked in the laundry. I've done the lot, from driving the minibus to running the first team. So I just want to be able to educate myself first, observe, learn what is really good in Canada already, what can we change and enhance, how can I help influence, and that's from like the ground up, so from grassroots right to senior, and from obviously success with the national team helps, because then that I've seen the success of the Lionesses and what that's done for the game in England. Like it's a top down, bottom up approach.
And speaking of success for the senior women's team, you've mentioned in your first press conference as Canada head coach that you want to lift trophies with this national team. And so what do you think, when you assess where the team is right now, what does Canada have to do to win a World Cup?
Well, it's the hardest job right now because the women's game globally has got so much better. Every team has improved, you know, and you look at the US are just going to get better under Emma too. So for me, we've got a really talented pool of players. It's about how do we introduce some of those younger players that can maybe influence the World Cup in 27 and give them the caps that they need. How do we create more goal scoring opportunities? Because this team is already hard to beat. They've shown that. They've done some fantastic things over the last year. What they did during the Olympics, I can only have admiration for. And how do we build on the style of play so that we can score more goals? And there's some real attacking talent in this team. It's just about creating a framework, giving them some freedom, and make sure that when we play the top teams, we're as prepared as possible. We've got our best players available, because you need that, and you need a bit of luck in a tournament because everybody's trying to win the World Cup.
I mean, moving from the club game, from the NWSL, what are you taking from that experience, and what are you looking forward to in the world of international soccer, which I do think has a little bit of a different feel? You know, you're not with the players day in, day out. So what are you thinking about, you know, the experience that you do have in the club game and shifting over to the international space?
When I was in the NWSL, I thought that actually the league, in terms of pace of play, intensity, transition, was quite reflective of international football anyway, in terms of pace of play. So I thought that actually prepared me quite well. It's about how you can impart your knowledge as simply and as quick as possible into the players so they can get your ideas, because you don't have a long time with them. You're not the one that's developing them day to day, but can you influence their development? Absolutely. Can you give them detail that helps them? Yeah, for sure you can. And then it's about building really strong relationships with their clubs so that you can support the player through their club journey too. And it's about winning games. You know, winning games builds trust, it builds confidence, and it builds the ability to continue to sustain, to build. So I think that's key priorities for me. And if I'm honest, first of all, just building trust with the players in me is a key priority when I walk in the door.
I know that was a priority for you as well when you were with the San Diego Wave. And one of the things that I've been most curious about is how, now that there's been some space, how do you sort of reflect on the time that you spent with that club, and what sorts of lessons did you learn from that experience coaching the Wave? Are you going to bring into this next role?
Yeah, it took me a couple of months really to be able to look back, if I'm honest. But now I can look back. Like, I look back with immense pride. I'm super proud of what we're able to achieve. Like, being an expansion team, finishing third in the league, getting to a semi-final of a playoff, like no one's ever done that before. Winning the league in your second year, winning a cup, creating a style of play, creating a culture where the players felt like they were safe, happy, performing, developing, but being challenged was a huge plus. I learned so much from some of the staff that I worked with there that were incredible. I learned about building trust is so important, because when I walked in the door, they didn't trust coaches. So if you say you're going to do something, do it and be accountable for that. You know, be the one that shows vulnerability, be the one that holds your hand up and owns their mistakes so that players can do the same thing. And I learned a lot about alignment in terms of leadership level. So, you know, that was one of the key reasons I took the job. I felt like Kevin Blue, the CEO here, his values are very aligned to mine in terms of people first culture and the way we want to build. So I think that's a big learning for me, is like making sure that the organisation that I'm worked for is aligned to the values that I hold dear to me.
Yeah, I mean, I do think one things that happened this week, in addition to your announcement, was seeing the news of the Jaedyn Shaw trade, her going to North Carolina. I think there was some interesting language coming out of the club about the timing of that trade request. And I think everything that you're saying about that environment where players are coming in, and, you know, we just actually spoke to the general manager of Gotham FC, Yali Averbush, and she said, you know, every player has a kind of a natural lifespan at every team. And so obviously you're not in that environment. Like, I don't think you can really speak to this trade, but just in terms of, like, you know, having young players come into that environment and trying to set them up. You know, you are a coach that does have that reputation of setting up young players. So how do you try to approach balancing what a team needs versus what a young player might need in terms of minutes, in terms of development? Like, that is, I think, still kind of the ultimate challenge of coaching in the space right now.
Yeah, it is a challenge, but if you have to believe in it first, you have to believe in giving young players a chance. You have to believe that they're good enough. You have to believe that you're going to put them in, you know. And I didn't always get it right. There were times when maybe I could have given Mel a few more minutes or Kimmy a few more minutes, but it was balancing the NWSL, the physicalities of the league, whilst trying to develop those. And obviously, you know, Mel wasn't available for me for quite a long time last season due to injury, but we gave young players a chance, but you have to believe in it first, and then all of your staff have to believe in it and buy into it, from your performance coach to your wellbeing and psych coach to your general manager. Like, everybody has to be on that journey with you, and it's not easy. It isn't. And it's also, how do you create a program that if they're not getting substantial minutes for you, they're still developing and playing within a games program for your club somewhere. So, you know, that was a key part of what we were trying to do at Wave, was how do we develop a team underneath, you know, and that never happened in my time, but it's so important that they're not just sitting rotting on your bench because they're not developing. But yeah, it's a balancing act, but players are getting younger in the NWSL and people are getting more opportunities, and I think coaches are believing in young players more now.
There's a lot of notes of culture building in the conversation that we're having so far. And so to transition both from younger players to more veteran players and back to the Canada, wow, sorry, haven't had coffee yet, Canada women's national team. I think about players like Christine Sinclair, who played a huge role in setting the culture for this team, almost to the point where other younger players built their personas and their style of play off of and around her. So as you step into this new role, how are you envisioning what it means to sort of change the recipe and sort of reset the culture of this team while also developing newer leaders like Jessie Fleming, for example?
Yeah, everything I've heard about this culture, it doesn't need changing. It just needs me to lead it, embrace it, and take it in the right direction. Like, they've got a very strong unity and culture in their player pool. It's about setting standards and expectations and having clarity around that. I think that's going to be really important moving forward. And then it's about, for me, like, speaking to the likes of Christine Sinclair and the senior players and the alumni to understand more and educate myself and speak to the current players and support people like Jessie and her captaincy. What type of captain is she? What type of captain does she want to be? And how can she be supported by, you know, a leadership group that is voted for by the players? And is that representative of the group? And then how can I help that leadership group lead themselves? Because a high performance environment should be led by the players. They should set the standards, they should set the expectations, and then I help guide and support that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously some veteran players were involved in your hiring process. Someone like Diana Matheson, who's now also, you know, obviously a key part of the launch of NSL. I mean, how do you kind of walk that line of wanting their input, knowing that they're not necessarily in the environment, that they have a lot of institutional knowledge, but not necessarily, you know, they're not in that day-to-day with you? No,
and I've had really good experiences with Diana so far. She's been part of the process, and I will support her as well in terms of her doing a great job launching the NSL. So it's taking their experiences, it's learning from the group now as well, because my experience when I played are not going to be the experiences of the England players now. You know, and what's now is really important, but it's also not losing the legacy of players like that had such an impact on the game, that was so important to the fans. So how do you involve them? You know, how do you keep them involved in the programme? How do you make sure that they're still a part of the fabric of the team whilst moving forward with the current group and understanding their challenges and what they want to achieve and how they're going to achieve it?
Casey, there are people involved in this podcast who will not be named who are huge fans of young players like Olivia Smith. You've mentioned throughout this conversation the importance of developing young players, but what excites you most about players like her and some of the younger, we spoke about Jade Rose, younger Canadian players who are coming up through the pipeline, and how do you plan to really nurture them in this role as national team head coach?
Yeah, I was lucky enough because I was back in the UK for 4 months. I watched quite a bit of Olivia, and will continue to. I'm going to go to the UK at the end of the month and watch some more games as well. So I think with players like that, it's about giving them an understanding of what it is to perform at international level, exposing them to it, giving them an understanding, supporting them with senior players around them, holding them accountable, but supporting them and challenging them in equal measures, because she's an exceptional talent. You know, what she can do with the ball is fantastic. She needs to learn a little bit more of what to do without the ball, which is part of my job, is to support her through that and putting her in positions where she can be successful on the field. and making sure you've got enough experience around her to support her, and exposing her to as many caps as you can. I think that's important, because if she's going to play in 2027, she needs to have a little bit more experience to be able to do that, and that only comes with the next year of games.
All right, Casey, before we let you out of here, we of course need to ask, I mean, you are infamous in the NWSL for the cooler, for the coats, for the blazer. Like, what do you want to start fresh with Canada? Do you want to bring some of these unofficial traditions with you? Obviously, you're going to need to layer well for some home games in Canada, depending on the time of year. So, I mean, I think that coat collection that you might have from the UK could come back into play. But you know what? What are you thinking when you step into these shoes for Canada?
I'm not going to change. I'm going to sit on a cooler. I'm going to have some nice coats, some nice blazers. I don't have a red one, though, so I need to get one.
Okay. I think you got to get Karina LeBlanc to take you shopping. I feel like that's what she is meant for.
That could be fun. That could be fun.
All right. Well, we thank you so much for joining us here on Full Time, and wishing you the best luck. Obviously, 2025, you've got a little time here to build, so looking forward to what comes next.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me on.
All right. Before we get out of here, we would be remiss if we did not discuss the devastation caused by the fires tearing across Los Angeles, especially because it has serious implications for the women's soccer world. You may have heard that the U.S. women's national team's future camp has been moved to Fort Lauderdale, and that is really just the beginning, Meg. I mean, this is huge, both on like a global and a soccer scale.
Yeah, I mean, Angel City is set to start preseason in a matter of days, I believe. So I think there is a real sense of everything is in limbo right at the moment. I mean, one of the things I do find honestly kind of fascinating in terms of optics is NWSL had set a media day for January 23rd and 24th in Los Angeles that appears to still be on, even as the U.S. camp has moved to Florida. And in theory, the whole reason why they were in LA was to kind of piggyback off of the U.S. women's national team camp. I think everybody is obviously really cognizant of just how resources are really stretched right at the moment. And so I think that is very much a factor. I think also we've all been watching kind of Allie Riley losing her childhood home, getting married a couple days later, kind of the emotional journey she's been on. She was just on CNN talking about that and what, the state of her neighborhood and all of that. So I think it is both like a very emotional thing in terms of like what Angel City is going to have to move through, but also, just kind of a much bigger thing than the NWSL.
Absolutely. I mean, 12,000 structures destroyed. The last I checked, there were at least 25 deaths from these fires. So many people displaced, so much generational wealth from Black communities and Native LA communities that could take several more generations to rebuild. There are urgent questions around climate change, because you have to assume that part of the reason these national team camps were being held in Los Angeles is because of the weather. And so now they're having to deal with fires on top of that. And then, of course, 3.5 years from now, we have an Olympics to deal with.
Yeah, I think that's also a massive question. I know the New York Times did a story on that this week in terms of, I think there is a push for this to kind of be an event that helps pull the city together. And just honestly, having been in Paris during the Olympics and knowing some of the infrastructure challenges for Los Angeles ahead, and like, to be fair, they're also a host city for the 2026 Men's World Cup. Like, there are other things that will be happening in Los Angeles before an Olympics, but just the sheer number of people incoming, the public transportation that's going to need to be required, like, it feels like a thing where right at the moment just is kind of an impossible ask in terms of the rebuilding that's already going to need to happen. And then you just worry about what gets prioritized, right? With any major sporting event, I think we've seen the costs that can get put on a city, and Los Angeles is obviously going to be going through it for, at best, the rest of the year, if not beyond. And so I think there is some real worry about what an Olympics could do to the recovery for LA. And I think that's a very valid criticism have right at the moment too. So yeah, there's a lot of bigger picture things that I think we're going to be keeping an eye on. But I think the point about climate change too, I mean, the NWSL has faced that in how many ways now, between hurricanes, air quality. Yeah, I mean, obviously the schedule has been talked about flipping to the more global schedule, playing through the winter. But obviously, Boston, Denver now being in the league, Chicago, Seattle, like a lot of places are not necessarily, Utah, going to be able to play through the winter. And so, yeah, I think there are big fundamental questions facing this league of how do you run a professional sports league in a time of very intense climate change. And obviously NWSL is not the only one going through that, but there is a chance for a league that likes to say that they can innovate to potentially innovate and try to figure out how you approach something that, I mean, Portland has been affected by it, Seattle's been affected by it, LA has obviously been affected by it in terms of air quality and wildfires through the summer. So, yeah, I mean, I think we're going to be obviously watching what happens with Los Angeles, but bigger questions coming out of this for sure.
And in the meantime, there are several ways to take action. Angel City has communicated that they are no longer asking for physical donations, but are asking people to make donations to the Los Angeles Fire Department Foundation. We will put a link to that in the show notes as well. There will also, on January 17th, be a distribution event for people who are in need of resources at Dodger Stadium, SoFi Stadium, and BMO Stadium. So be on the lookout. Make sure that you're following Angel City for future updates about how you can help. And there have also been other clubs, the Orlando Pride, Washington Spirit, who've also been super intentional about throwing their support behind the need to distribute funds and aid and care to those who've been affected by the fires.
Yeah, and obviously the LA pro sports team have all teamed up and joined together for a donation. And I think it's around $8 million for victims. Fanatics is also running that LA Strong t-shirt. That's an extra $3 million right there, plus proceeds. I think there are going to be a lot of ways, but it does really seem like the best bet is honestly finding a GoFundMe too at this point and figuring out what you want to do. So I think, everybody's going to be keeping an eye out for those in terms of Angel City supporters or anyone else in the community. So if you've got one that you want us to flag, definitely let us know. And we'll try to keep you updated on this on social media and on the podcast next week as well.
Absolutely. I know I sometimes get overwhelmed in these moments because I get discouraged knowing that nothing I do will ever be enough to mitigate or reverse devastation caused. But I saw something, I wish I could cite the creator who posted this on Instagram, that said to do for one person what you wish you could do for everyone. So yeah. I just offer that as some encouragement for fellow, overzealous perfectionists like myself who want to just always save the world.
I mean, I think what has been really encouraging is just like the overwhelming urge for everyone to support these communities, and community is kind of the way to get through and survive. And the women's soccer community has always been a really special one. So I think that there is a path for hopefully some healing, some rebuilding, and in the future, some soccer on the field at Angel City.
Yeah, we say in the future, but I feel like we're going to blink and games will just be like
it's gonna be March
shoved
14th.
Into our eyeballs. Can't wait for it though, because that's why we're here. Thank you so much for listening. As always, Happy New Year. As I said, I'm still saying it. I still got Christmas lights up in my house, okay? I'm definitely saying Happy New Year. I'm Tamerra Griffin. I am alongside Meg Linehan, and you've been listening to Full Time with Meg Linehan. You can catch me somewhere in the world listening to Bad Bunny. My favorite song is Weltita, somewhere on Blue Sky and Instagram.
All right, I'm on Instagram, Blue Sky. Also, if you're reading in the new, I joined Storygraph finally. So it's like a tracking app, but like I do really like the graphics. I got off Goodreads like a really long time ago.
I was gonna say this sounds like an upgrade
looking for
of
something new. I'm vibing with it. It's a good app.
I'm downloading it.
Let me know. I'm on like book 8 of the year already, so like we're moving. But if you have any other questions or comments for us, you can always hit us up at fulltime@theathletic.com.
Full Time does not happen without podcast producer Theo Lloyd Hughes, video producer Leah Griffin, and executive producer Emily Olson. Thank you so much for listening as always, and we will be back with you next week on Thursday.